Hello, hello. This is Alex Burkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, I'm talking to Ty Magnin. Ty is the Director of Marketing, Content, and Web at UiPath, and previous to that, he was the Director of Marketing at AppQs. Ty and I have run in similar circles for years, but somehow we had never met until we had this conversation. And this conversation was great and highly varied. We chatted about the differences in working at big companies versus startups, hard-won leadership lessons and mistakes made, how to structure content and SEO teams, and how we're thinking about life and purpose. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Ty Magnin.
I try to save Friday afternoons for networking. Right.
Oh, yeah.
I try to have a call with someone that's like not at the company. Sometimes it's just someone at the company just to, talk shop, right? Hear what else is going on in tech. So this is kind of like that, right?
When did you start doing that? We talked to Tracy Wallace a while back, and she had the same practice when she was at Big Commerce.
Oh, really? I don't know. I guess it's been going on for a year and a half, probably. As soon as I realized, I stopped networking at some point. After I left Boston and left a small startup and joined a big company and moved to San Diego, I was like, okay, I got to figure out how to make this a part of my routine.
Do you think, so I actually noticed the same thing when I joined HubSpot. I think sometimes you inoculate yourself against the outer world because you have so many people within the company itself that sometimes you lack that, the breadth of connections. Like when I was at CXL, I used to, do these lunches and coffees and conferences. And then through my time at HubSpot, I felt like all the connections became HubSpotters,
Yes. I think the walls are pretty high at a big company. And I think you're right. It's because you're working on a team of 100 other marketers. So you don't feel like you have to network as far, but you're still missing the picture if you're not, doing that, seeing what else other companies and teams are doing.
Yeah, for sure. So I listened to a podcast with you on Jimmy Daly's Superpath podcast, and you mentioned that you're an extrovert.
Yes.
I consider myself on the pretty far end of that scale as well. And we've both kind of fallen into this world of content marketing, which is filled with mostly introverts. Has that struck you in any way as weird?
I think one of my favorite parts about content marketing was actually distributing the content. Being loud and obnoxious about it a little bit, right? So, okay, I wrote a great post, or sometimes, someone wrote a great post for us. Emailing that to friends, right, in the network, posting that in the right forms, tastefully, of course, blasting it out on Twitter. I really enjoyed those parts of content marketing, which I do think made me I don't want to say unique, but different than I think the introvert that wants to sit there quietly with their laptop, doing research and writing all day.
I do think that's the least popular part of content marketing and probably the most underrated. If you include wrapped up in that, all the link building and just general outreach and heads up work. So yeah, I guess that is a differentiator. I enjoyed that stuff as well. I also found my writing process was actually very extroverted because at CXL, we would do, it wasn't really SEO driven content. It was more like the pain point SEO, if you want to take that term. But I would come up with ideas and I would basically talk them out, either with Pep or I would go to coffee meetups and just through vocalizing the ideas, I would come up and clarify these things. And then I would come back to my laptop and write them. So it's almost like my writing style was also very heads up in that way.
That's really interesting. You said pain point SEO?
Yeah, it was a coined term from Benji at Grow and Convert, I believe.
Yeah, another San Diego guy.
Yeah. I do feel like every content marketing agency is either in Austin or in San Diego. We've got a little axis going here.
Yeah, it's true.
So how did you break into digital marketing in the first place?
I studied film and poetry in college. Communications, if you give me a little bit more credit than that. Joined a startup, just wanted to work in a startup, figured marketing was the right place for me to end up, but kind of got into sales early, and ultimately was given a choice. Said, hey, you can work in sales, you can work in marketing. We think you probably will do pretty well in marketing. Why don't you go try that? And just kind of said, all right, sounds good. Let's see what that looks like. Um, I guess at that startup, I was writing all the emails, doing social, building some of the content, started doing some website stuff. So I don't know. I think it was just a little bit magnetic based on my skills and interests.
I know I can kind of infer why poetry would help you out with what you do now. I think poetry is probably actually one of the better things you could study if you're into, writing, communications, marketing. It's probably the thing that translates the most directly to copywriting, which is one of those foundational skills in a T-shaped marketer skill set. But how did film translate? Like, how did you take anything from your film education with you into your marketing career?
Yeah, I think storytelling, right, is at the heart of film a little bit more than poetry, right? Poetry is word selection, right? It's the sound of those things. It's evocation. Film is storytelling through this very rich medium of sound, of visuals, of characters, right? The way the character's hair is done, right? The set design, like there's just so much there. If you want to directly connect the dots, when I was in college, I was doing a lot of freelance work for video needs and found a bit of a niche in the startup scene in Boston. So I was filming, like there were some conferences that I did, and that got me some referrals to some companies that wanted a little bit of video work done. It was a great gig. I was able to rent out the equipment for free because I was a student, charge for that equipment and my time, right, as a freelancer. And, it did well enough to help pay my rent and whatnot. So that introduced me to the startup world. And originally I thought, like, I'm going to go study documentary film. I'm going to go like travel around the world and, maybe be like a nature documentarian, something cool like that. But kind of fell in love pretty quickly with this startup scene and also felt like I could make some money at it kind of quickly. So that's when I really jumped in.
What was it about startups that drew you in?
A lot of young people that were in charge of running a company. I also had a t-shirt company back in college. My buddy and I were designing t-shirts, selling them around campus and elsewhere at Boston events. So I think entrepreneurship was already a bit attractive. It's a little bit in my family. I had a brother that was doing a tech startup. My dad was an entrepreneur for a little while in the biomedical field. So yeah, I think the combination of those things made it pretty attractive.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a little piece of you that likes that hustle as well, in terms of like when you were talking about content promotion and like being loud, getting everything out there. It's like that ability also translates to the idea of like building something from 0 to 1 and like, scrappily, like kind of creating something from nothing.
Yeah, I think so. And I also just like being immersed in a role, right? And I think you get that when you are, there's a few factors, right, to getting really immersed. I think one is accountability and ownership. Without that, like it's someone else's thing, you're just not going to care that much. But when you started something, or at least you have a big stake in something, you feel, like every cell in your body has to make that thing work. Right. So I think that was attractive to me. I don't think of myself as an extreme person, but an intense person. And so I think I like the intensity of entrepreneurship.
So I actually really want to dig into this because I think you and I both have similar experiences. Like I joined a startup right out of college. CXL was a startup. And then I joined HubSpot, and HubSpot was 2,000-ish employees when I joined. When I left, it was around 4,000, I think above that. And it was a completely different world. There was pros and cons to both sides, but you went through a similar thing with app queues. I don't know how big app queues was when you joined and left, but then UiPath, right? Like it sounds like pretty similar transitions.
Yeah, app queues was like 5 to, 65 in my time there. UiPath was like 1,000 to 3,500. So the biggest jump, honestly, Alex, was moving from a small company, 65, that was 5 not that long before, to 1,000 people in a marketing team of 100, right? So yeah, that jump was the most drastic. I don't feel like the evolution at UiPath has been that drastic. It's just like scaling up all the departments that kind of existed when I got there.
Does it feel like there's more structure and comfort in a way, though? I know, at least for myself, when I was at startups, it felt like that if I took a couple of weeks off in vacation. Like nobody was going to cover that. Whereas at HubSpot, I felt pretty comfortable doing that. I felt like they had a system in place. The business was not going to fail if I, just left. Whereas there is so much more on the line in everybody's individual role at startups.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Dare I say, like, it is harder to be as engaged at a larger company. And I think at a smaller company, I mean, for better and for worse, right? When you're kind of in that entrepreneurship mode and you're one important member of a small team, you have a lot more on your shoulders, right? Mm-hmm. So you kind of do burn the midnight oil or work around the clock or put in a little bit more in order to make that successful. I find that I can't say I struggle to be engaged in my current role. I'm pretty well engaged, but it's not the same. I don't think it's quite at the same level as I was at Aptuse.
So let me follow up on that. And this is a question I still don't know the answer to, even though it's my own world as well. But in my early career, and I'm still doing this, I've always optimized for learning. Like I want to learn as fast as possible and as much as possible, with the assumption that those learnings later are going to pay off. Do you think that the learning potential is better at a startup because of that intensity and immersion? Because I can also see the case that a big company, you have more people around you who kind of show you the ropes and you don't have to like reinvent the wheel and start things from scratch. So when it comes down to like learning and skill development, leveling up, what do you see the difference between those two worlds being?
Yeah, great question. It's hard to say because at my first two startups, they were my first two startups. So there was so much to learn there just by virtue of like being new in the business world, right? Being new at leading a marketing organization. So the learning there was rapid, of course, but I can't quite answer how much of that was by virtue of just being new in a business sense versus being at a smaller company. I think that there's a lot probably that has to do with being at a smaller company and having to level up all the time, especially as the company evolves, right? Moving from 5 people to 60 people, or being the first marketer on the team to leading a small team of, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 when I left. Those were very different jobs, right? And I felt like I constantly had to network and hustle, I think, to figure out, okay, how do you make a first good marketing hire, right? Okay, now how do I scale this thing into departments, right? Or into like teams? How do you find the next channel for growth, right? Those challenges took a lot of learning and of conversations. I think at a big company, for me, I joined a big company, yes, to learn, because I wanted to work alongside as many CMOs as I could. And fortunately at UiPath, like all the marketing leaders there have been a CMO somewhere else before, right? And they have, a lot more gray hair than we did at smaller, younger startups. So the learning is good, but it's different. Maybe there's not as much of it, if I can say that. But to be honest, like a lot of the reason I moved to UiPath was also finances and lifestyle. Mm-hmm. Like the salary was almost double what I had, and the equity package I thought was a better bet to turn into something. And fortunately, it seems like it will. The company did IPO this year. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it wasn't all learning. But you got to make choices in life.
No, dude, that's actually the number one thing that I said when I joined HubSpot too. It's like, this is financially just a much better deal. So like, even if I don't learn as much, like there's definitely some upside with that as well. So if you join a big company, there's simply more resources available. I also found that the learning is different and less clear cut. So after I left CXL, I did like what I learned at CXL post for the blog. And I remember it being really easy to put together. Like all the things were clear cut. And then when I did the same for HubSpot, and I was like, fuck, what did I learn? And, the things I have learned a lot, but they were very intangible, kind of soft skill oriented things. Because when you're in a big company with tons of different teams and tons of different footprints and delineations, and, everybody's kind of got their own area, you really have to learn like, communication and getting buy-in, not stepping on toes, like prioritization, like how do you carve out work that's important? And all those things are probably more impactful over the longevity of your career but it's not as simple as saying like, yeah, I learned how to run experiments, or I learned how to use Google Tag Manager, or like very clear cut things. I don't know if that's your experience as well.
Yeah, that really resonates. I was thinking today about how decisions get made at a larger company, right? Versus a small company where you all sit in a room and you're like, hey, I think this is how we should go. You agree?
And then you just do it.
And you just do it, right? Yeah. So it's making those, having decision making processes, right? And then also getting work done has to just be so well coordinated. So one thing interesting about my role, and I think one of the welcome challenges that I found, context, I run our web team at UiPath.com, or at UiPath, we run UiPath.com. I run a digital governance program that helps bring all these other digital properties like our Academy team, our Docs team, et cetera, kind of into a more unified digital ecosystem, right? So our customers experience, what they experience on the doc site feels familiar to what they experience on UiPath.com and so on. So anyways, running UiPath.com, this digital governance program, puts me at the center of a lot of the going-ons at the company, right? Hire a new C-level person, they're going on the About Us page or the leadership page, right? If we have a new marketing initiative, campaign, whatever, we're likely involved to help set that landing page up. New products, new product pages. So we are kind of at the center of this business, and we have relationships with everybody, and coordinating, amongst this large enterprise has been a really interesting challenge.
Can you explain, I want to ask about the challenges, but can you explain more about your team and what your team looks like and what the jobs are? The governance thing is really interesting to me. I think I understand the website, but can you just kind of elaborate on the role and, the makeup of your team that you're running?
Sure. So the web team I have direct reports and then some indirect teammates that I consider to be a part of like the all hands, all up web team. So the teams that don't report to me directly are our developers. There's probably 5 of them and a QA person. Yeah. Our SEO team, there's 2 SEOs full-time and a leader that does paid ac and other things. They're, again, indirect reports that work with our, in the larger web construct. Then on the web team, we have designers. So we have a UX designer, design manager, and a UI designer. We have kind of this loose content team. We have a blogs editor. She also does a lot of brand stuff just because we sit underneath brand in the organization. We have a content specialist who helps build pages. And we, I hope, are opening up a copywriting role that we really need. Quick plug, if anyone's out there that's looking to do some web copywriting on an awesome team, hit me up. And then we have a project manager who helps facilitate all the work that gets done. We're hiring another project manager. And then we have an agency that's helping us with Scrum management, with a little bit of like product management or business analytics. A very specific roles of the CMS we're using. We have a content modeler. They have to basically like slice up the website and decide what the authoring experience is going to be like. We're using Contentful, which is a headless CMS. So there's this kind of unique process to that migration. And we just brought on a web performance analyst who started on Monday.
Nice. I remember you asking about the analysts. So that's cool that you hired them.
Yeah.
So wait, you're on the brand team, and then the SEO team is separate. Where does the SEO team sit?
They're sitting in demand.
Okay. And then how does SEO work with your content team?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How does that relationship work?
Yeah. So, for technical SEO stuff, they're going to be working with developers. We just launched our new blog on Contentful and migrated all the blog posts over. So in that process, right, they're helping us, they're doing crawls, right, helping identify some issues, maybe in, a canonical tag or whatever. There's a long list. And then we do work together on content. We have freelancers that are doing a lot of writing for us. And then we have the internal person that runs our blogs. And in both cases, they're going to help us provide, keyword insights and ideas for H2s and stuff like that for web pages or blog posts. We're working together to kind of build that keyword roadmap too, that we can go and try to tackle in a strategic way together. The relationship's good. And it's funny. Some people are like, okay, SEO often lives under web. Why wouldn't they be directly under? And I think there's actually a good argument for this, which is that when SEO lives outside of web, they can kind of put the proper pressures and screws to web to make sure that you're actually doing the SEO things. When SEO lives under web, sometimes I think they get a little ignored, a little brushed to the side, which probably isn't the best relationship there. So I think that there are benefits to it, which is, I don't know, just commenting.
Yeah, I've seen it in different ways. At HubSpot, we had our web team was separate from the SEO team, and the SEO team was more aligned with acquisition, and content was actually separate too. But there would be like an SEO content strategist who would bridge the gap between SEO and the content team that would actually write and execute on it. So they would create the roadmap, basically like talk to all the teams, acquisition, product marketing, build that roadmap, and then the content team would execute it and kind of build the playbook and the brand editorial guidelines and stuff. So it sounds like you guys have a somewhat similar symbiotic relationship, and you guys kind of own maybe the ideation, and then SEO is going to help out in terms of like optimizing and appending those topics with keywords or something like that.
Yeah, and it goes both ways, right? We're pushing to kind of put our heads together, right, to build out what the ideas for our editorial calendar should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So we run a content marketing agency, so I've got to ask you a couple of questions about content before we move on to the interesting stuff. What do you look for? Like now you're in a leadership position, so you're doing you're not mainly, but you're doing a ton of recruiting and management. So what do you look for when you're hiring content talent specifically? And how do you recruit that talent?
Depends on exactly what the role is.
Okay. So like what roles do you have in your team, and like how would you kind of define like what success looks like for that, or like a content writer, for instance?
Yeah. So I still go further and say it depends on exactly what that person's going to be writing on. So I think about maybe a few spectrums of talent, right? I think about how good is this person at writing for voice and tone and getting that brand sound. If it's someone that's writing blog articles or long form content, I actually care a little less than if it's someone that's writing headlines and short form content. I think, I don't know why, but I haven't articulated this before, so bear with me. But I think when you're doing long form, as long as you don't sound like a scientist writing an essay, right? There's just less opportunity for as much of a rich voice and tone. I'm sure someone will prove me wrong, okay? But I think the short form stuff, where you're talking about homepage headlines, right, is a real opportunity to come through with that, that voice in order to establish that relationship sooner. So that's one spectrum that I think about with copywriting and how it aligns to position. And I actually think about maturity too, right? If I need someone to really sing in terms of voice and tone, I think I'm going to need someone who's a little more senior than someone who I think is writing blog articles and can just kind of crank that content out. I think the real trick is I find that like with design and content, the more mature designers and writers are able to break outside of their own personal taste better in order to really lock in on a voice and tone. And they can switch, right? Depending on the context, they can sort of dial up that voice and tone or dial it back. I find that, often, I guess, just to talk the other side of that, a less experienced designer or writer kind of has their own voice and tone they bring to it, and it sounds like them, and they might try to skew it to work for the brand, but it's just not all the way there. I think about other roles within content as well as writers, right? There's content managers and content specialists. In the case of web, we have a content specialist that we needed to be pretty technical because their job is mostly loading up web pages, setting those off to stakeholders as previews, and facilitating, the publication process as well. They need to make some small content decisions, but for the most part, like they're not writing copy from scratch. They might write a little blurb here or there, and decide sort of, should I use the 3-column lockup here or like a 3-section, lockup. So for that person, I look for someone that's technical, and honestly, they're an English as a second language person. Spent a lot of time living in London, so like it's pretty native to them, but they are in Romania now, and they've been a great fit for that role. And then one day we might have a content manager. I think of that person, well, it could go either way. I think with web, you either have a UX manager that kind of oversees everything on a page and how pages connect, or you can have a content manager that oversees sort of everything on the page, right? The graphic that is on it, the copy that is on it, maybe a little bit less how they all connect. But in our case, we're leaning into our UX team to sort of have that control, so we have less of a need of a content manager.
So this focus, you've got a strong understanding of people and like, I guess, pattern recognition, I'd call it. So that's kind of a step in my direction, like that I'm taking in my career through my in-house roles and also the agency, is like, how do we identify the key roles that we need and how do we pattern match the people that are going to best perform those? I think it's a pretty nebulous thing in terms of like how to acquire those skills for pattern recognition, like how to basically place the, place the pieces together. So have you consciously thought about how to get better at hiring, recruiting, judgment when it comes to people and org structure? How have you acquired that skill set?
Great question. I'm no expert. I'm sure of that. But I think just taking the time to like write out what you're looking for, right? What you really need this person to do, what you're okay with them not being great at, right? And kind of just like holding this thing up and looking at it through all these different lenses and taking the time up front to do that will help the whole process go easier, right? I'll be honest, sometimes I enter a hiring process and I'm not 100% sure of what I want. For this web performance analyst, actually, Alex, like I reached out to you in part to figure out who I'm looking for, right? To help me like scope this role out, because I haven't worked with one this closely before. I've had people that are good at analytics, that have owned analytics as part of what they do, but never someone full-time dedicated to it. So ideally, you have all that work done up front and then the process goes smoother. I definitely wasted some candidates' time, that were probably unqualified, just because I wasn't sure what I wanted. Would you agree? Do you think a lot of that's just like upfront thought and considering kind of the scorecard for this person? How do you approach this problem?
Yeah, this is something that the co-founders of the agency and I are kind of thinking through right now, because we've got a couple open recs right now. And there's one in particular that we haven't defined to the full extent, because our thought process is if we see the right person, they can kind of fulfill, they can proactively think about what this role could look like in a way that we can't imagine because we don't have the experience in this particular area. But I think that may be flawed logic, because as we're going through interviews, we're realizing that it's just scattershot. It's all over the place in terms of like the backgrounds and experiences people are coming with. And it's a lot of additional effort for us to kind of parse through that in each round of the interviews and even the selection process in the first place. So I think ideally you do define it down to like, who is your ideal candidate and like what specifically are they going to do and what specifically the goals are. That also allows you to reach out to your network and do outbound recruiting a lot easier because you actually can concretely say this is who you're looking for. I think it's difficult in many roles though, and web analytics is actually a very good example of that. I would say that any social media or sometimes design, it's kind of hard to know what you're looking for, at least for me, because I don't have the experience in those areas. I don't know. That's a tricky one. I wanted to ask you, like, if you've, you don't have to be specific here, but like if you have any mistakes in terms of your hiring, if you place somebody in the wrong role, and maybe what blindsided you or what part of the decision process, like would you have changed? Was it you saw a large logo on their resume and that had a halo effect, or, they were very good in the interview and like actually didn't have the skills to match? I'm wondering so there's the reverse pattern recognition, right? It's kind of like the exclusionary principles of like what should you try to avoid in the interview process or the recruiting process, or like what details should you ignore, I guess?
So you asked me a few questions there. I'm thinking about which is my favorite. Have you read the book Who? I
have not. My co-founder has though.
Yeah, it's I think it's Jeffrey Smart. And that is a very opinionated way to hire someone. I've taken some things from that book. I don't follow it to a T. But one thing that I wish I'd done earlier in my hiring would be, and I do it now consistently, would be to basically evaluate someone based only on their experience, not on what they say. Right. So you really have to dig into, okay, what was your last role, Alex? What did you do at HubSpot? I did this and this and this, right? Okay. How are you measured? How is your performance actually measured? Right. And how did you do against that performance? Right. And basically you're hiring someone that is able to consistently overachieve on their goals. You have to, kind of back check and do the referrals bit in order to make sure that person's not just BSing. But I think that where I made some hires that were not a great fit, is where I sort of hired someone based on what they said, on how interested they were in the role, on how good of a culture fit they were, not based on previous success in a similar role. And I think part of that was also that the role was a bit odd. I was hiring a growth marketer with a specific set of skills and responsibilities in the Boston scene for a certain budget, right? I needed someone that was, just moving on to their second job probably. And I think we kind of rushed it because I've been going through resumes and no one was a great fit and I wasn't getting any closer. So, I just took the best culture fit I found. And you know what a big mistake is always when you're like, well, I think I can teach this guy how to do the role, right? You need someone, and the older I get, the more experience I get, the more I'm like, no, I just want someone that's done this successfully before.
So that's actually really interesting. I would say that Pep at CXL hired me for potential. Like I was really early in my career, and I think he was really good at that with many people. But I've talked to him recently, and he's like, fuck potential. Like I want somebody who's done it before. So he's completely changed his mind. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but from conversations and his tweets, he's kind of alluded to that. I think it's hard though when you're at a startup. It seems like many cases you do have to hire for potential, just simply because like a lot of the people who have been there and done it are going to these large companies that are going to pay a lot more. So how do you kind of balance that, where it's like sometimes in certain positions, there may not be that background, there may not be that experiential level. Like, do you still just opt for it and basically say, hey, we just need to pay up and like get the person with experience? Or how do you think about that?
I think if you are at a young company and budget is a constraint, right, and the risk factor is really high, you can sometimes hire for potential. I think that's part of why I was hired way back when in my first startup, right? Like, why would you hire a film kid into this kind of role? I don't know. He seems like he's hungry and wants it. I think hunger is a really good sign of that. The people that are like, hey, I'm willing to, sleep on the street in order to get a spot at this company or whatever it is, often are the people that will just do whatever it takes, and flex themselves into whatever role they think, they can have the most impact. So I think you kind of have to look for that scary level of hunger.
What do you, is that how you think you got it? Or how do you think people inferred that hunger in you?
I don't think that's exactly how I got it, but I think there was a little bit of that in me then, right? Like a little like confident and hungry, right? I don't know if we can answer on that. There are people that I've seen that have been hired, right, that have had that story of like, I don't care what the salary is. Like I'll sleep, on a living room floor of my friend's apartment just to have a chance to work at this company. Like I just want to be in this environment. Those are often the people that I think do really well. Yeah, and I've seen it happen again and again in our 20s. maybe in your 30s and 40s, that's not a good.
It's a red flag. Well, I think about that because I think I would rather hire sometimes for certain roles younger me than current me. And that's not to say that I'm, less valuable now. I'm just more expensive and the cost reward ratio is off. And especially for a startup, it's like, I want to find that undervalued talent. And I take great joy in kind of developing it. It's just hard to predict. So I think there's just higher variance there. Like you could totally flop, or the person could be a fucking superstar. And then, you can try to like wind back the clock and think like, all right, what was it about them that indicated that to me? Or like, how can I repeat that? And I think that's the hard part that I'm really trying to understand. And maybe there's no answer. Whereas the experiential based, it seems like a lot less variance. And it also seems like you're probably going to get less of a good deal. People with experience know their value.
Yes, facts. So what do you think are, maybe it's harder to judge this from a hiring perspective, but what were those key ingredients for you, right? When you were working at CXL that helped you find success, right? Was it hours you're putting in? Was it networking? What were those key ingredients?
What made me more successful and grow at CXL?
Yes.
I would say, yeah, I definitely put a lot of hours in. I think I locked into a role in a very specific area that I had a natural mind for. CRO is pretty expansive in terms of like the rabbit holes you can go down, and I've got kind of an ADD dilettante mindset where I just love to, learn a bit about UX, a little bit about analytics, about experimentation and statistics. And it allowed me to fill up a bookshelf that I'm looking at right now with books on those subjects that I would read after work. And then I would basically take insights from those, write about them in articles. Those articles would fulfill a personal brand thing. They basically built me an audience through the work I was doing. So I was essentially getting paid to learn all these cool things that I wanted to learn. So I think the role itself is really interesting. And then, yeah, I think PEP just has very, very high standards, and you want to meet them. Like there's something about his style that makes you kind of disappointed in yourself when you don't meet those standards. So I think I aimed pretty high. And then I also think like just being at CXL, like you're part of a pretty big network of like A players. We threw conferences. I reached out to people for blog posts, and I got to meet the best in the business when it comes to experimentation. So I would say those three factors: the personal brand building, well, four factors, I guess: the personal brand building, the high expectations from the boss, the role lock in, like being in the right place where I'm actually doing it for myself as much as the company and the paycheck. And then the outside network. If I could, I don't know, just ad hoc try this
good.
right now.
I think you're missing an ingredient though. You talked about reading books and the importance of that and helping you probably get better at what you were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Are you it sounds like you still read, yeah?
Yeah, for sure. I would say not as much in terms of like pure business stuff. Like I read much more for pleasure and fiction nowadays. But I actually do think maybe, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but I think that could be a predictive thing, is like if people are listening to podcasts and reading books in your industry, and not only that, if they're writing blog posts and like going on podcasts and doing side projects, it's like that person is definitely exhibiting hunger in that hustle.
Yes. And I think that reading and that sort of educational journey is crucial to going from, wherever you're trying to go, I guess, but definitely when you're new in a role, to being to getting a level of mastery over it, right? Like there are a lot of people that have been there before. There's a lot of cheap books on Amazon.
Yeah, I told my sister this because she just graduated college and she's kind of contemplating her career and going into marketing as well. And I told her that you're going to have to basically give up the idea of work-life balance in a way for the first couple of years if you want to achieve escape velocity. It's not that you need to work 80 hours a week at your company, but after work, like take a course, read books and do all these things. Because if you do them in your first 2 or 3 years, that gap that you're going to basically create among the similar crop of people coming out of college, you're just going to get way more opportunities from then on. So it's like those first few years, it's so crucial to just kind of go overboard like that.
Totally. Maybe even the first 10. But, what's funny is like, I've been thinking back on that sort of trajectory that I think I put myself on to some degree. I'm by no means ahead of my peers by too much of a measurable margin or any measurable margin in some measures. But I look back now and I'm like, well, shit, like, what did I give up for that? Right. And like, what am I interested in now as I sort of find myself having a little more time, not working every weekend. And it's sort of this now, I'm kind of on this new journey, right? To find meaning, to find purpose, to remember what my interests and hobbies are, and then start kind of bringing those back in so that I can find that hopefully better balance through the rest of my 30s.
Were you also reading in your spare time, or were you just working a ton of hours at your first couple companies? Or like, what do you feel like you, not what do you feel like you sacrificed, but what do you feel like you filled your time with in those years?
I mean, I remember my first startup, I was working from probably 8:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. 3-4 nights a week, like at the office, sitting in a chair, So that's the time right there. And then weekends, probably a little bit too. I can't say that was like consistent for 10 years, like no way. But yeah, spent a lot of time reading. Podcasts were not really a thing 10 years ago. That happened maybe a couple years after that.
Were you freelancing and doing kind of side hustle stuff too?
Yeah, some, not a lot, but I would take a couple gigs here and there to fill some time. Networking too. I always enjoyed, being able to talk shop evenings, weekends, what have you. Yeah, but I also spent a lot of time with my, girlfriend, now wife, right? With friends, with my son, as much as I could. And now plenty, right? He lives with us. So, especially over COVID, right? We're spending all of our time together, at least in the same house. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just saying that, if you're 20 and listening to this, right? Don't let it all go out the window. Like there are, some people live a great life by, finding that balance early or starting their career late, there are many ways to cut it. No wrong way.
Yeah. When did this idea of balance come in for you? Because the last 2 or 3 years, it's really been like a hot topic for me and something I'm really thinking through.
Yeah, probably the last, couple years, the same. Probably like when you cross the 30 mark. I don't know exactly how old you are, but somewhere around then. Realized like, okay, I'm pretty established in my career, right? Yes, there's more room to grow, but is that the priority, right? Like life doesn't last forever. You have, I think honestly, Alex, a lot of it just a lot of the hustle got a little extinguished when I started making a little more money or significantly more money. You're kind of like, all right, now, like I kind of took care of that. That was the thing I was hustling for. Is this all bringing me meaning and joy? Right?
Yeah, so I've been asking myself this question a bunch. I have a little newsletter and it's been a common topic, but with my co-founder, I asked this, with my friend, Neil, we talk about this all the time. It's like, what is this all for? Like that question becomes apparent once you've made it to a certain level where you can basically be comfortable. And I wonder, like, do you think like you've solved the money problem? Like, does that bring you comfort or does that bring like a net new kind of feeling of like a void of like, well, what do I do now? Like, how do I spend this time now?
Both, right? Like it's insanely privileged, my current position and lifestyle. But yeah, there's absolutely a void. And it's just like that next level of meaning, right? It's like food, shelter, whatever else. And then it's like purpose, right? And so I've just kind of started this purpose journey. I'm rereading Man's Search for Meaning right now.
Good one.
Classic. I've contracted a life coach, right? So working with him on this same exact thing, just getting started on this stuff. And I don't know, I think it's going to be a lifelong journey, right? It should be. But yeah, that's how I want to spend like my spare time, right? Instead of like putting it back into work, it's like, I want to put it into being a better human and sort of optimizing me. And I think that, sure, maybe it will help pay dividends and bring me to the next level of my career. I hope it becomes someone that people enjoy working with that much more, right? Helps me be clearer headed in decisions that I'm making or whatever. Or maybe it takes me, to India to go sit in a, ashram and just meditate. I don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the magic of it. It's unpredictable and you can't really plan the path out ahead. I think, though, I mean, there's definitely this concept that the two are mutually exclusive, like the life's purpose and like kind of your passion and joy, and then the things you do for work. But I find that the people who can blend the two, like there's such a magic to that when you see them in action. Like there's just like a fire in their eyes and like they're just like so clear in their purpose. So that's, I mean, eventually, like I hope to find that.
Yeah. What kind of things are you doing to get closer to a closer alignment to purpose or even to discover purpose more?
Yeah. So one thing, well, there's two things kind of that come to mind here. One is I think early on in life and up till about last year, I really had swim lanes for everything. So I thought about my friends and my family and my health and fitness and business and work. I thought of them all separately. And one big thing I'm trying to do is combine those as much as possible. Work with people I love, do hobbies and fitness that kind of like coalesce with the people I love. So basically bringing all the parts of my life together and seeing what results from that. I'm still not sure the answer, and I'm not sure if that's the effective way to find this. And then the other thing is moving towards building things. I looked back at my childhood and I thought, like, what did I always love doing? And I was a kid who had a lemonade stand. And in, fifth or sixth grade, I started a little t-shirt thing as well. And we actually discovered cafepress.com, and I got like a little e-commerce check in, seventh grade or something. It was like $20 or something.
Huge.
But yeah, it was like, I learned you could make money that way. And then throughout like high school, like I had a band and like that was more of a business. And then I look back and I'm like, man, I really loved creating things, like building something from 0 to 1. And who knows, like if the content marketing agency is like the lifelong thing, but it's been really cool, like having ownership and I guess creating something with two people I consider very, very close friends. So that's created a lot of value and joy for me. And also been more of like it's combining those two worlds of like, it's paying the bills. And it's also like something that is a lot more passion than just, checking in for a paycheck, but it's still difficult. It's like one of those things that I haven't fully, fleshed out. I think I'm pretty young still for that, but yeah.
Yeah, that's great. The idea of working with, your best friends really resonates with me. I feel like we had that at AppFuse. I feel like at UiPath, we're all just really different people, which is great. Like I love the diversity and global nature of the company. That was something that came as a very pleasant surprise. I didn't think it was going to impact me as much as it has. But yeah, it's very cool to be on a Zoom call with, someone in India and someone in Bucharest, Romania, and someone in London and someone in New York. Like I just find that, I don't know, it just tickles me the right way. But anyways, that resonates with me, working with best friends. It's a good way to spend your days.
Absolutely. So I would say that's one good thing about working at a large company, by the way, back to this point on like the startup versus large company is simply the quantity of smart people you can meet. Because I met my two co-founders of the agency at HubSpot, right? Because there's a couple thousand employees. There's a good chance you're going to resonate with a couple of them. So I feel like that's a really interesting way. Like if you do want to build a company or just generally, like if you want to get to know people, like working at a large company is great for that.
True.
So what drives you right now? Why do you do what you do?
I think I do it for the team, honestly. I think that we have started some projects that I really want to see through. I know that there are a few things at work that I'm working on, right? Like doing a better job presenting decisions to be made at a higher level, managing up. Like there's so much I'm still very novice at and can really gain from, focusing on and improving.
Would you say leadership is the big focus for you right now in terms of your development?
Absolutely. Yeah. Leadership management, but I still have to learn some of these hard skills and pay attention to like where the industry is in terms of being a web manager, right? Like I have to make a lot of web strategy decisions. So I have to focus on those and pay attention and kind of still level up some of that sort of hard technical skills. But generally, yeah, the books I'm gravitating towards are around leadership management. They always have been, but yeah, that's me. You too?
Yeah, well, the leadership thing, it's one of those things where because you can't quantify it as easily, like technical skills, you kind of know who's bullshit and who's not. But I find that with leadership and even sales and like kind of persuasion books, like some are really good and some are really bad. And it's really hard to like parse them out. But yeah, I'm definitely reading more of that stuff. Multipliers right now, that's kind of like the top for me. What is a good book that you would recommend? And what's one that you thought was totally bullshit and you should avoid?
5 Levels of Leadership. I recommended that the other day. I'm going to butcher the name. I don't know if it's John Maxwell or if I'm remembering it wrong, but it talked about, what a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leader is. A level 5 leader is someone, maybe even it's 4, but someone that like inspires others to become leaders or, to follow their own journeys. And I take a lot of that with me day to day, right? I want to help other people along their career journeys, their, individual journeys, whatever those might be. One that's kind of bullshit.
Or just not useful. It doesn't have to be bullshit.
I don't know. I'm so like overly optimistic. I find that I'll find something out of everything. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a book that I put down halfway through or like decided I was just going to skim. I'd have to look at the shelf to pull it out of the archive. What do you have though? What are some that you were kind of unenthusiastic?
It's funny because I asked the question and I can't think of an answer myself. I think it's because good books are just more resonant and more memorable than bad books. Like I can't think of a book. There's been many that I've quit like halfway through, a lot of business books, but at this time, like I can't say like the title of it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it just doesn't stick as much.
So with leadership, I feel like, is it art or is it science? Is it methodology? Like, is it a mix of all of them? What is leadership?
Whoa. I think it's being the best, most authentic version of yourself. Right. And like being someone that is on that journey to bring a very effective version of themselves to the workplace every day.
So in that sense, is the best way to become a good leader less about reading and maybe more about getting a good therapist?
Yeah, I think it can be. But I also think like, listen, you need to know, you need to have these decision-making frameworks, right? And be effective in that way. You need to be a great communicator. You need to understand some of these like concepts around like, radical candor or all sort of the typical like business management concepts. So I think all that is important and foundational. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think that when I consider my leadership journey, I'm thinking more about how can I evolve myself to be someone that is more kind of sticky, attractive, right, effective in a business environment.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about it?
I think more and more of this idea that we don't have work problems, we have human problems disguised as work problems. So I think that one of the better things people can do, especially if they're in a leadership position, is work on themselves and go to therapy. Yeah. So there's this book, my co-founder David recommended it to me. It's called Reboot. And the guy runs a company called Reboot as well. And it's basically therapists masked as, business coaches. But I love that model. The book was amazing. It's half journaling and you end up like, tearing up because it's like mostly personal stuff that tends to relate to business. But I think that model is becoming more, that resonates with me a lot more than like the surface level tactical stuff. Like you said, I think you clearly have to learn how to communicate effectively. I think like being persuasive is one of the most universal skills you could probably develop, no matter what you're doing. You at a certain level, you need to know like, the ins and outs of the business and industry. So I think like it's very difficult to take somebody seriously if they don't know much about what they're talking about. Like I just find like I disrespect people who haven't put the time and effort into learning what they're kind of like leading on. So I do think like that level of expertise comes in handy too. But I don't know. I'm still kind of developing my philosophy, I guess, if you will, around leadership.
Nice. I have Reboot downloaded to my phone. I haven't started it yet.
It's phenomenal. You'll spend a ton of time just on the journaling parts, just that part alone.
There's a lot of homework.
But it's important, Yeah,
that's great. That's what I want. I'm hungry for that stuff, for this sort of life coaching work.
What do you think some of the biggest leadership mistakes you've made are? Or management mistakes?
You're going to have to turn the recording button off for some of those.
We can always delete stuff if you want to.
Fair enough. I think some of the biggest leadership mistakes I've made revolved around letting my ego or a desire for more power come to surface, right? I think that I've sort of entertained some of those fantasies about, hey, how can we grow my org structure, right? And putting that as a priority under this sort of excuse of, we need more people so that we, so I'm not overwhelmed, so I can be more strategic, or this team will be better aligned if they orgs over to me, right? And I think that fantasizing about those things, right, and not sort of dealing with them in the right way, that will lead you astray as a leader.
I love that answer. Thank you. That's honest. And yeah, I resonate with that. I think I have gotten into the same trap, although it exhibits itself in a different way, usually through too much control and too much impatience. So I start to dream these scenarios up where it's like we grow this big and like this is where I'm at. And then that pushes me to be like a less effective person through more of micromanagement and control and through pushing people too much and being impatient with results. And then it kind of backfires, right? People get
Yeah.
pissed.
Yeah. The common thread there sounds, if I can jump to it, is this sort of, fantasizing about the future, right? That makes you look a little bit more shiny.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I find too, whenever I get too self-centered about it, it's like that's when these problems occur. It's like whenever I focus on the other, whenever I focus on like building them or making them into a superstar, then it's like I get what I want. They get what they want. Everybody's happier and it's more effective. So I find that like just getting too in your own head is really like the culprit, which it also goes back to that thing we were talking about where like a lot of the problems with leadership in business are actually personal, you know? So it's like maybe you just meditate and see a therapist and like those things help you not do that stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Well put.
What are you or who are you chasing, if anyone? What's next?
I think I'm chasing a lot of great CMOs. I think our CMO UiPath is fantastic. I admire the hell out of them. We have a lot of, again, like I said earlier, former CMOs that are in like VP level positions that I'm chasing, that I look up to. And then also like a lot of entrepreneurs that have started their own company, that have sort of started to scale that company. Those are exciting times. I think about that as a possibility for what comes next. And I think I'm mostly just chasing a better version of myself.
So is your goal to become a CMO?
I think there are forks in the road that take me in different directions. I think that's one of them. Very clearly defined, right? It's just like continue up the career ladder at a company like I'm in, or take a step back, you get there a little faster, or a smaller company, you know?
Public company CMO would be, I feel like, so stressful.
Yeah, I don't envy today what my CMO has to do. Like I works harder than anybody else, but also exhilarating, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, you can affect so much change for sure.
Yeah, you kind of get to put a dent in the market, you know, with a good quarter or what have you.
Hey, I want to ask you, there's one question that I wrote down here. So I listened to the podcast you did on Jimmy Daly's podcast, the Superpath one. And I'm just going to push back on something you said. So you mentioned that content is harder to get published at UiPath because it has to go through so much quality control and rounds of approval. But you also mentioned that this is good because it results in better content, right?
Yeah.
Do you believe that? Can you make the case that like more rounds of approval and more committee makes better content? I'm skeptical.
I like this. This is a good argument. Two heads are better than one, Alex. How's that for an argument?
I mean, that's a pithy statement, but there's nothing to back it up. So like there's no real way to like quantify this. I think one way to basically do this would say like, what does good content mean? I don't know if I have the answer. I would probably say in a business context, it is memorable and produces results. And I think more rounds of approval. So if you look at it in terms of like expected value, like you got to weigh the cost and the potential that it's going to be effective. And effective could mean it gets traffic, it could get leads, whatever your kind of metric is. And the higher the cost goes, the lower the expected value is. So the cost being, maybe the time spent and like the amount of people involved, I'd think there's a lower expected value. But also, I mean, I think sometimes when there's too many cooks in the kitchen, it lowers the uniqueness of the content.
Yeah, it comes out a little vanilla.
Mm-hmm. But if you have a big brand, I could also see, to your point, it being very important to keep the brand voice and like everything down. Like there's legal considerations, privacy considerations, there's all these things. And if you fuck up, it could actually be a pretty detrimental thing in a big company. So I could see it both ways. I
also think so much has to do with how you present that content for feedback. Okay. Are you throwing it over the fence on an email on a Friday afternoon? Right? Are you hopping on a Zoom, talking to people you trust, teasing this thing out, right? Like queuing it up for them and asking for a specific kind of feedback, right? And I think it's fair to draw a line between, I guess I'm saying, I think asking the way that people ask for feedback can help improve that content, or it can help, or it won't, right? It'll take it in the opposite direction. And I think that might be an overlooked part of the content creation process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I do feel like some of my best pieces have been put through the rounds in terms of like people that I trust looking at it and giving really good constructive feedback and feeling comfortable to say no to it as well, and like really like putting my foot down if I feel like this is an important point to make. So I feel like it may be all about the process involved.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think each company is going to have a unique process, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have now like an investor relations team, that we have to loop in certain cases for certain kind of content assets. You're not going to have that in a smaller company. Help make the case though, Alex, for I don't want to say less provision makes for better content, but we're kind of talking about it on these two ends of the spectrum.
So I don't know if I fully believe this yet, but let me try this one out. So I like this idea of single cell content marketing or decentralized content marketing. So at a company, I think the more people you can mobilize, the more kind of ground you can cover in the same way that militaries do, the military operations do. So I look at a company like Ritholtz Finance or Ritholtz Capital. Like everybody that works there is on Twitter, and they've all got like 100,000 followers, and they all have their own blogs. And essentially, they decentralize their entire operation. They're a small company, not quite like a public software company, but I found that their footprint is massive because of that. But then you also have to trust each individual person and kind of train them in those methodologies. And I've not actually seen that, I don't see that model often. It's something that we're trying to do at our agency. So I think maybe that helps with smaller companies that need to expand their size without as many resources. And I do see larger companies doing the opposite because they need to centralize their messaging, make the user experience cohesive and kind of like, across all touch points the same. So I think it's probably one of those things that it's the answer is depends. And, that's frustrating. But I think it depends on what you want out of your content and what your weak points are. And in small companies, it's often resources and distribution, which I guess at UiPath you guys have. And then like the downsides are higher for a company like yours. And especially because it's, a semi-technical product, there's a lot of different voices that need to go into this stuff. So yeah. I think there's nuance.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about how in some orgs, like content can kind of be everyone's job.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the salespeople can raise a content idea that's like, here are my 5 objections that I deal with on a daily basis. Why don't we turn that into a blog post or blog series or I don't know, one sheet, whatever. And then maybe the CSM has a different idea based on a customer conversation they've had. I think that the key to great content is having a pulse on a specific audience, right? Really understanding what they're going through, what kind of, what their online habits are, and then writing to those.
And so does that come from the strategic side? Does that come from like the keywords you're writing about and the topics that you're ideating? Because the way, I guess like we could probably compromise on this in a model where it's like the strategy is kind of set and centralized. The execution, there's a process, but there's variation within it, right? So if I'm a writer at your company, I could have my own voice, but I still kind of have to adhere to the strategic guidelines. And then at the end, like we funnel it through the editorial process, an editor-in-chief that can essentially homogenize it to the best of their ability. And I could see that being the model that kind of is representative of a lot of journalism nowadays, right? Like the Atlantic, for me at least, I follow individual writers and I know that they're good because they write for the Atlantic. So they're kind of like granted that level of trust. And I know it's going to be a certain style of piece. I know it's going to be long form. I know it's going to be like a certain kind of tone, but that author also has their own kind of unique spin on it. And I think that's an interesting thing that we want to try to keep intact.
Yeah. And I think the point I was trying to make is that ideas should be coming from all over.
Right.
Because it is hard when you centralize content too much to keep a pulse on all the parts of the business, on all the sort of deepest tentacles that the company is reaching into. It's hard for the content person to have a pulse on like what partners are thinking about right now, or what this kind of prospect in this kind of region is thinking about, right? Or this big customer that's global. They're so vast. So I think creating this sort of inbound engine for content ideas is really important when you have a big org and content production, or at least the process and strategy is centralized. The bit about having different voices is interesting too. It's like, how much do you want it to sort of fit the mold, right? And what is that mold versus letting the writer sort of have some freedom of expression.
Yeah, I don't know the answer on that. I'm sure it depends based on the company and what kind of voice you have and what kind of writers you have too. Because like, I think if you don't have a unique writer or a writer with a unique voice and a following, it's like there's no real marginal value of that. It's like they might as well fit the mold of your brand.
So then you'd almost, to take that to an extreme, you would pull the author name off of the post, and it would literally just be company, right? Like
I think a lot of enterprise brands still do that, and I think it's the most frustrating thing in the world. It's like that's how I know not to trust a company's blog is when it just says like, company team or something like that. Like if it was like HubSpot team wrote every blog post, I'd be like, get out of here. But I love the idea of like sourcing ideas from all over the place. I think content teams should do that more. I know at HubSpot, we used to do that from like, product marketing, and I was on the acquisition team. So I would funnel ideas in. We would try to get as many people into that conversation or like their ideas on the table as possible. And then SEO and content would work together to create that into a strategy. I'm trying to do that with experimentation as well, like in terms of my CRO and experimentation background. So I think like you do as an experimentation team program manager, you do get a lot of insights from like the, conversion research and qualitative data and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, like there's going to be a lot of ideas you'll never come up with. The sales team could, the customer success could, the developers could. So I feel like giving some sort of like an intake form in any endeavor like this, I think that's cool.
Yeah, but an intake form is the driest thing of all time, right? How do you persuade those salespeople, those CSMs, whatever, to contribute to this thing that's ultimately like not really their responsibility?
Yeah, dude, that's a hard problem. I have no idea what the answer is. I think there's probably like some form of gamification. There's probably some form of just pure like persuasive evangelizing that can be done, but I think it's really hard to get that participation.
Yeah, it's one-on-one relationships I found, and keeping those warm.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know. That's maybe really old school and not a software answer, right?
I think it's really difficult. It's something that everybody wants to do too, by the way. It's like not just, content and web and CRO. It's like everybody wants more involvement and kind of like buy-in from other teams. And it's like, that is a really hard problem. And I think that's a leadership problem.
Yeah. So I have this issue with this digital governance program that we started talking about. The program, again, is for all of these digital property owners, like the academy, the doc site, forum, what have you, and subject matter experts like SEO or legal or security to get in the room together. It's every other month right now, and prioritize like, hey, what are the things that we really need to standardize that are going to make the biggest impact for our company, our audience, whatever. Getting attendance has been my biggest problem, right? One of those, I think one of the problems is that the time zones are tough, right? That's a hard one to overcome. Another is that like, this isn't these colleagues' primary job. They're focused on their silo, right? This is like a little bit of an annoying thing. Hey, we need you to change your fav icon to orange from blue. They're just picking up work. And the other bit is like, I don't have great relationships with all of these people because I'm so siloed and focused in marketing and in web. The thing that I found to work more than any other, there are two things that have worked. One is getting the CMO and CTO to say, hey, guys, this is important. I want you to show up.
Top down, for sure.
Yeah, that helped for the next few meetings. And then, attendance trailed off again. But the real thing is just having relationships with each of these people and maintaining those relationships, and just honestly checking in. How's it going? Caring about what they're up to, so that, they feel like this is something they want to participate in. This is someone they want to work with.
Yeah, I agree with those. It's like the horizontal persuasion as well as the top down. You kind of need both of those. I don't know if this works in your program, but I also found a lot of when I want to create action or change, what I end up thinking is just this model of like kind of what's in it for me. So I kind of reverse engineer it and think like, all right, if I were asked to do something outside of my job and like it wasn't part of my normal job description, there's not really an incentive for me to do it. What would actually lead me to do this? And it's like maybe in the case of CRO and content, like maybe it would be recognition. I don't know. I feel like if I get recognized and like kind of visibility, like that could be something. I'm just brainstorming now. I'm not sure if these are actually things that would work, but it's like, all right, well, maybe I'm the type of person that actually wants to go into a career change into this kind of like direction. And then maybe you just need to like find the people who are interested in that and like kind of like facilitate those people, have them be your cheerleaders. I don't know, but I end up trying to structure the program or the communications themselves to basically facilitate people's actual desires, you know?
Such a marketer.
It's usually small things like that, but yeah, it's like, why does anybody do anything? Once you answer that, you can kind of, reflect that in how you communicate it. But I do think like the relationship thing's huge. I remember at HubSpot, like a lot of my work was cross-functional and a lot of it was like, influence without authority type stuff, working with different teams and trying to get them to help out and lend their hand on campaigns that weren't theirs. And it would be impossible before I would meet them. And then I would go into the office for a week and just get coffee with them. And then the next 3 months would be like, oh, fuck, like we're working together great now. Like this is what changed except for a 30-minute meeting. But, it really is like there's that personal, intangible touch point that matters.
Totally. And I miss going into the office because I think it helped facilitate those relationships. Obviously, more so than having to like schedule and show up on Zoom, Do you struggle at all with working remotely?
Yeah, for sure. So I've worked remote for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. Like I did my whole time at HubSpot, but I would go in once per quarter and meet the team and like hang out with everyone. And I also did a lot of travel and like co-working spaces, which you can kind of do again now, but it's still not the same. So I had some sort of an outlet. And also one thing I've noticed is that now that everybody's remote, it's like, there's so many more Zoom calls than there used to be. And I'm, enjoying this one a lot, but it's like too many Zoom calls, man. You get done at like the end of the day and you're just like, fuck, I can't look at my laptop anymore. That's how I feel anyway.
Even as an extrovert, it's a lot, but I do find that I enjoy it. Like this is the way I want to pass my time.
I think there's something different about I don't know how you feel about like the virtual versus the in-person. Like when I leave an in-person one, I'm energized.
Yeah, I would much rather be in person. This does take more energy for me than being in the same room. But yeah, I mean, this is not novel. Everybody knows this.
Yeah, I will say like this is the first time that I've ever wanted to go back to the office. Like 2 years ago, if you asked me like, hey, would you work at an office again? I'd be like, nah, definitely not. Now I'm like, I kind of want to work at an office 5 days a week. Like it's just like this total 180 from where I used to be.
Yeah, I'm there 100%. I don't know if I ever really wanted to work remote. I wanted to live in San Diego. So like that was a nice perk to taking a remote job. It let me move from Boston where I was to San Diego. But now I'm like hungry to I either have to like do a better job going out for coffees a couple times a week with people that are in similar roles, or eventually find an office I can go to with people that I can work with. I think I might have to start a company just so I can have an office of people to hang out with.
That's what we're talking about at the agency. Like we should just have an office at this point. The dinner and coffee stuff though, that's the thing that I'm looking towards now is like, how do I build this into my calendar and actually make it a habit? Because I used to have it. It's just, through the pandemic, you kind of drop that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say podcasting lets you talk to people. I mean, that's sort of in that direction, but it's not in person. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. For sure. I do want to do in-person podcasts eventually, but would you want to do some rapid fire questions real quick?
Of course.
All right. So I guess, I don't know if this is rapid fire, but who do you admire professionally and why?
Well, 2 names immediately came to mind. One is Diego Lamato. He is our VP of product marketing. I worked with him at my first startup. He brought me into UiPath. He's just such a solid manager and solid person. Probably one of the best product marketing minds out there. Follow him on Twitter if you want to. And then Bobby Patrick Orsimo. I think both of these individuals, they have the power to persuade. They are pleasant to work with, but don't take BS, right? They make sure that things are getting done and done well. They're leaders I admire.
Cool. What's the best burrito in San Diego?
Great question. This one's going to take me a minute.
Is this a controversial thing too? Like how like the best taco in Austin probably starts some fights?
I think you're allowed to have your own opinion. There's no wrong answer in San Diego for burrito.
You guys
I'm
are more
going
chill
with,
down there.
yeah, it is. No one's trying to fight you over your burrito choice. Roberto's has a really good burrito. There's a handful of those in North County. I like their chicken burrito. Best fish burrito, though, which is one of my favorite burritos, comes from Fish 101 in Leucadia.
Okay, cool. I'm definitely going to hit those next time. I
Yeah.
had a spot in La Jolla. I don't remember what it was called, but it was probably the best burrito of my life. I should have wrote it down. And then I think it was like the place on the beach Scott brought me to called like Oscars or something. They had like
Oh,
$2
Oscars
fish
is in
tacos.
PV. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. They've got really great fish. Everybody knows Oscars. That's definitely in the running.
I
But
love
you
that
said
spot.
burrito. You got to be specific next time.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention the Oscars real quick,
Shout
But
out to
the
Oscars.
burritos I feel like are famous in San Diego.
Yeah.
If you could create your own category in Jeopardy, what would it be? And would you get every question right?
It would be surf breaks in North County, San Diego, and I would get them all right.
I love it. Do you consider yourself more artistic or scientific?
Artistic, but I'm towards the middle of sort of well balanced.
Mm-hmm. What's a career choice that you considered but didn't pursue?
Documentary, film production, living in like the Sahara of Africa or something. I didn't think it was going to pay.
Do you still think you may pursue that someday?
No.
Gotcha. If you had if you had a book written about you, what would the title be?
Beautiful struggle of being a teenage father.
That's good. What blogs, podcasts, and influencers do you love to follow?
Champagne Poppy on Instagram mostly.
Gotcha. That's it.
It's where I get a lot of my content ideas.
Move over, Neil Patel.
I like Dave Gerhardt stuff. I tune into his podcast and his Twitter feed. I think he's great. There's so many. We probably follow all the same people on Twitter. Mike Volpe, of course, old HubSpot days. Short list.
Hell yeah. Well, that's all I got. Did you have anything else you wanted to say first off to the audience now that you've got their attention?
And what if I don't?
Then you can just not say anything and you can just tell people where to find you online.
Find me on Twitter at Magnin. It's probably the best place.
Perfect. Thanks, Ty. I appreciate this. This was super fun.
Likewise.